This podcast is brought to you by Nomad Internet.
Welcome to the AI Analysis Podcast. Today we're looking at something a little older, but with all the political rhetoric flying around, we think it's relevant. We're taking a look at the episode of the Average Intelligence Podcast, where they did a very deep fact check of the 2024 presidential debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Yeah, and that review they did, it's just a fantastic blueprint for understanding how modern political debates actually work.
Right.
Because when candidates are on that stage, the claims they make are really designed to stick in your mind. They're not always designed to be 100% accurate.
No, not at all. They're woven with partial truths, right? Or statistics that kind of ignore the other side of the story.
Exactly. Or sometimes just outright falsehoods. So our mission today is to just impartially go through the analysis from average intelligence and really focus on pulling out the crucial context behind those claims. We want to highlight where they did some really good, verifiable fact-checking.
Exactly. And the material they covered is, it's a behemoth. It covers every single flashpoint you can imagine. Economic policies, the whole mess around tariffs and inflation.
Major social issues, too. Abortion, immigration.
And, of course, the serious accusations of political, malfeasance. And what you see right away is that there are very few statements that are just 100% true or 100% false.
Not at all. We're almost always in that gray area.
It's that gray area of, well, it's mostly true, but you need like 3 layers of context to understand it. Or it's false, but it's built on this tiny little kernel of truth.
And that gray area is exactly where the rhetoric takes hold. Because that's where most people are designed to sort of lose interest.
Right.
If a politician can use a verifiable fact, even one that's technically accurate but, profoundly misleading, they've basically already won the rhetorical battle.
So our goal here is to give you that context, that ammunition you need to kind of pierce through the spin.
Exactly. So you understand not just what was said, but why it was said and what it really meant for policy or for history.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We should start right at the beginning with the procedural claims and all the context that was framing the debate before it even started.
Yeah, this is where the allegations of moderator bias immediately tried to color the entire event.
The first one was aimed at one of the moderators, Lindsay Davis.
Right. The claim suggested there was some kind of inappropriate relationship with the Harris campaign.
The specific allegation was that Lindsay Davis is Kamala Harris's sorority sister. And the fact check on that was somewhat true.
And that somewhat true is a perfect place to start. It's a textbook example of leveraging a technical truth to build a political narrative.
So what's the technical truth here?
Well, it's true that both Harris and Davis belong to the same sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha. That part is a verifiable fact.
Okay.
But the context is everything. Harris joined AKA when she was at Howard University. She graduated in 1986.
A long time ago.
A very long time ago. Lindsay Davis, the moderator, joined 13 years later, in 1999, while she was at the University of Virginia.
So wait, 13 years apart? And at different colleges?
Exactly. So this isn't a relationship of contemporaries. They weren't in the same chapter. They weren't studying together.
It's not like they were buddies in college.
Not even close. The relationship is purely an alumni connection, the kind that links members across, totally different universities and different generations. So the implication that this is some close conspiratorial tie, it falls apart.
Yeah, it's a classic rhetorical trap. You plant a fact that's 100% correct, they're both members, to imply a narrative that is just completely incorrect, that they have this secret bond.
And the average intelligence fact check nailed that. They correctly assessed the huge distance between the technical truth and the political implication.
Okay, but the second procedural claim, this one is, well, it's a lot more disruptive, mainly because it's still unresolved.
You're talking about the allegation that an ABC insider shared debate questions with the Harris campaign beforehand.
Yes, exactly.
And that one is still categorized as unknown at this time. And that uncertainty itself, that's incredibly damaging to public trust.
Where did this claim even come from?
It stems from an alleged whistleblower who was reported to be an ABC News employee, though their name was redacted. This person claimed the network not only provided sample questions to the Harris campaign,
but they also made promises about how the debate would be run.
Startling promises. The whistleblower allegedly claimed ABC promised they would only fact-check Donald Trump during the debate.
Only Trump.
Only Trump. And they explicitly agreed not to ask questions about certain topics that the Harris campaign had flagged as, off-topic or problematic for them.
Wow. Is there any proof of this?
Well, this is what gives it some weight. There's an alleged affidavit dated September 9th, that's the day before the debate, and it's supposedly notarized.
And it surfaced after the debate.
Right, which just fueled all the speculation. Now, ABC News has categorically denied all of it. They say the document is unverified.
So we're stuck in this really difficult position.
Completely.
You have an alleged notarized document dated before the event making this sensational claim. But the network is vehemently denying it, and the source is, anonymous.
And it doesn't matter if it's true or false, in a way. The existence of a credible-looking document like that is a tool that fundamentally erodes public confidence.
Yeah, for the rest of the election cycle, that unknown claim basically acts as a perceived truth for a lot of people. It just illustrates the power of an unresolved allegation.
Precisely.
Okay, let's shift gears completely now. Let's move into the candidates swapping data points on the economy. Taxes, tariffs, and that huge battle over inflation.
Let's do it. We can start with tax policy. Specifically, Harris's broad claim that Donald Trump's tax cuts only benefited the wealthy.
And the analysis rated that claim as false, but with a big flashing sign that says contextualized.
It is. We have to break down why that one word only makes the whole claim factually incorrect, even if the spirit of the claim resonates with a lot of people.
So what did the cuts actually do?
Well, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, it made changes across multiple income brackets. The top rate, for instance, did fall significantly. It went from 39.6% down to 37%.
And that's the one everyone points to for the rich getting richer argument.
Of course. But the cuts weren't exclusive to the top. The 25% bracket, for example, dropped down to 22%. The 15% bracket dropped to 12%.
So millions of middle and upper middle income Americans got a tax cut too.
They did. Now, the lowest 10% bracket, that was unchanged, as was the 35% bracket. But the claim was only the wealthy, and that's demonstrably false because the benefits flowed to many other tax brackets.
But the effectiveness of the claim comes from this idea of proportional benefit, right?
Exactly. A person earning, say, $20 million a year saves an exponentially larger amount of money from a 2.6 percentage point drop than someone earning $50,000 saves from a 3-point drop.
So while the cuts were spread out, the actual dollar volume was massively weighted toward the top earners.
Precisely. And that's why the claim, even though it's technically false, holds so much political weight. Because the impact that most people felt was way smaller than the headline relief for the highest earners. It really shows the difference between a statutory fact and, the felt economic reality.
All right, next up, tariffs. The eternally complex issue that always gets simplified down to tariffs are bad for the consumer.
And the finding here was, of course, it depends. It depends on a ton of factors.
Right. When we talk about tariffs, we have to move beyond that simple textbook definition. We have to consider the geopolitical intent behind them.
We do. I mean, the cost of the product, whether there are American competitors, how expensive it is in the first place, all of these things affect whether a tariff just gets absorbed by the company or passed directly onto you.
And the source material pointed out that the main reason for Trump's Chinese tariffs was geopolitical.
Yes. The goal was to force manufacturers to move their supply chains out of China. And the average intelligence review found pretty strong evidence that, in that regard, the policy actually worked.
So manufacturing did move.
It did. There was a significant shift, some of it even coming back to the U.S. And what's really interesting is that U.S. exports to China actually grew by 2019, which really complicates the idea that tariffs caused this universal harm to trade.
But that complexity was completely ignored when Harris came out with that very specific, widely quoted number.
Oh, the $4,000 number.
Yeah, that Trump's proposed tariffs would be a national sales tax costing families $4,000 per year.
And that claim was rated definitively false. It's highly disingenuous rhetoric.
How so?
First, tariffs are not a national sales tax. They're import duties paid by the companies doing the importing, not something you see on your receipt at the store. And that $4,000 estimate, it relies on a whole chain of assumptions.
Like what?
Like assuming the entire cost of the tariff is passed directly to the consumer, that no domestic alternatives become cheaper, and that people don't change what they buy. All of those are, frankly, unrealistic assumptions.
And we can't really talk about tariffs without bringing up the crucial context that the Biden-Harris administration.
Well, they didn't get rid of them.
Not at all. They maintained them, or in some cases, even expanded on them. They added new tariffs on things like Chinese electric vehicles.
And that's the political contradiction that just completely undermines Harris's attack.
It does. If tariffs are this absolute economic catastrophe, an administration should dismantle them on day one. The fact that the current administration kept them in place and even used them for their own strategy, it just undercuts the whole argument. It shows that both sides see tariffs as a necessary tool in modern geopolitics.
Okay, Harris also tried to link Trump's tariff policy to the trade deficit, claiming his tariffs resulted in the highest trade deficit in U.S. history.
The finding on that was mostly false.
Well, Trump's trade deficit did hit a pretty significant $654 billion in 2020. That's larger than most post-World War II administrations. But it was nowhere near the historical record. The source material pointed out that the last 4 years of George W. Bush actually produced larger deficits.
But the most powerful refutation here from the fact check is that Harris's own administration broke that record.
They did. The Biden-Harris administration's deficit has been larger in every single year from 2021 through 2023. They set an all-time record in 2022.
So it's a perfect example of a candidate using a true number. Trump did have a high deficit, but just neglecting to mention that their own administration surpassed it almost immediately.
It lacks historical perspective and, frankly, contemporary honesty.
Okay, now for the numbers game that affects everyone's wallet, inflation. Both candidates were very careful in how they selected their statistics.
Starting with Trump's very simple claim that he had no inflation as president.
Right. The rating on that was ignorantly false.
It's a classic example of rhetorical absolutism. It's just so easily disproven by the data. I mean, if he had just said low inflation, he would have been correct.
What were his numbers, actually?
His highest rate was 2.44%, which is only just a little bit above the Federal Reserve's target of 2%. And his average inflation was remarkably low. It bottomed out at 1.23%.
So good numbers, but claiming zero is just.
It's just contradicted by every economic metric available. He sacrificed precision for maximum impact.
Okay, this is where it gets really technical, though. Trump claimed that inflation under Biden hit 21%. And that was rated true, but requiring critical context.
And this distinction is so vital. The overall consumer price index, the CPI, that's the headline number the government reports. It measures a massive basket of goods and services. Housing, cars, healthcare, everything.
And that overall CPI peaked at what, 9.1%?
9.1% under Biden, yeah. Not 21%.
So where in the world does Trump get 21% from?
That figure comes from the sector-specific cost increases for essential everyday goods. The average intelligence analysis cited Yahoo Finance, which found that the cumulative prices for things like groceries, gasoline, utilities, the stuff you buy every single week, rose just shy of 20% over a 2-year period.
That changes the perspective completely.
It does. Because if your housing costs stay the same, but the gas to get to work and the milk for your kids goes up by 20%, the felt experience of inflation is much more severe than that 9.1% headline number suggests.
Yeah, that's the kitchen table reality versus the aggregate economy.
Exactly. The source used the anecdote about Dollar Tree becoming $1.25 tree for the first time since 1989. That 25% price jump on cheap, essential goods hits low and middle-income families the hardest. It makes the impact of inflation feel much closer to that 20% mark than the 9.1% average.
We also heard Trump claim that most of the Biden job growth was just bounce-back jobs.
And this was rated partially true. This requires us to understand how we measure economic recovery. After the pandemic shutdowns, millions of people were temporarily out of work. When the economy reopened, those people just went back to their old jobs.
Those are the bounce-back jobs.
Right, recovered jobs. And the numbers show that by May 2024, the Biden administration was claiming 15.6 million jobs gained. The source material, drawing on data from Snopes, indicated that about 9 million of those were jobs recovered directly from the pandemic.
So over half. A significant majority were bounce-back jobs.
Which means Trump's claim holds water. A huge chunk of that job growth was restorative, not, new organic economic expansion.
So while the administration did create several million new jobs, the rhetoric forces you to question the narrative of this explosive economic expansion.
Exactly. An honest assessment of the recovery has to acknowledge the bounce-back factor.
Okay, let's wrap up the economic claims with 2 quick ones that really rely on historical accuracy. Trump claimed Biden had the highest inflation rate of any president in U.S. history.
False. Just straight up false. History refutes this easily. President Truman saw 18.1% inflation in 1946. President Carter saw 13.3% in 1979. Biden's peak was 9.1%.
A simple historical inaccuracy.
Yep. And his final claim that he received more votes than any Republican or sitting president in history in 2020.
And that was
verifiably true. And this is a masterpiece of precise wording.
How so?
He made sure the claim was factually correct by using two specific exclusions. Biden got more votes, but Biden wasn't a sitting president at the time, nor was he a Republican. By threading that needle, the claim becomes unassailable, even though it's designed to leave the impression he won the overall popular vote. It's a strategy in itself.
All right, let's move on. Section 3, social flashpoints. We're talking public health, immigration, and the incredibly polarized topic of abortion rights.
We can start with two broad accusations Harris made about the state of the nation when Trump left office. First, that he left them with the worst unemployment rate since the Great Depression.
The finding on that was blatantly false. The rate in January 2021 was 6.8%.
And 6.8% is high, sure, but historically, it's not even close to the worst. The analysis they did detailed multiple years after the Great Depression with much higher unemployment. 1975 was 8.2%, 1982 was 10.8%, and 2009 during the Great Recession was 9.9%.
So her claim just erases decades of economic history.
It does. It tries to maximize the perceived severity of the pandemic-era numbers.
Okay, the second claim was maybe more sensitive, that Trump left them with the worst public health crisis in a century.
This was rated somewhat true, but requires profound context.
The true part is just based on the sheer scale.
Right. The overall COVID-19 death toll in the U.S., around 1.2 million, is technically the highest death toll from a single disease event in a century. But the word worst, that requires a much closer look at the severity of the disease itself.
And this is where the context around comorbidities becomes so important.
Absolutely. The National Institutes of Health, the NIH, reported a critical nuance. Only 20.3% of those deaths had no comorbidity recorded.
Meaning the vast majority of people who died had other pre-existing conditions.
Exactly. And the overall mortality rate of COVID-19 was about 2.3%.
Which forces you to ask what metric you're using to define worst. Is it the total number of victims or the lethality of the disease?
And the average intelligence fact check used a really striking comparison, the early years of the AIDS epidemic. Between 1981 and 1990, AIDS had a mortality rate of 63%.
63%.
The fatality rate was nearly 30 times higher than COVID-19. So while COVID was globally pervasive and highly transmissible, its lethality was substantially lower. Calling it the worst crisis requires you to deliberately pick the one metric that works, total deaths, and ignore everything else.
Okay, let's switch to immigration, where we heard some of the most sensational claims of the whole debate. Trump claimed that many illegal immigrants are from insane asylums and prisons.
And this claim is, it's logically impossible to prove and highly unlikely for the majority of people crossing.
But are there any numbers at all?
There are. Immigration officials arrested about 13,700 people crossing illegally between 2021 and 2024 who had prior criminal records. But that's a tiny fraction of the total number of crossers, and it certainly doesn't tell you if they were from an insane asylum.
It's fear-based rhetoric.
Absolutely. It lacks any statistical grounding.
And then there was the claim that generated massive headlines just for being so bizarre, Trump's statement that Haitian migrants are eating dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio.
Found to be false. A classic case of misinformation. The city manager of Springfield explicitly denied any evidence of this.
So where did it come from?
A viral video that supposedly prompted the rumor showing a woman arrested for killing a cat. But that actually happened in Canton, Ohio. And the woman arrested was an American citizen, not a Haitian migrant.
It's a complete fabrication.
Built on misattributed local crime news.
Okay, on to reproductive rights. Harris made several very emotional claims about the consequences of overturning Roe v. Wade, which she attributed to Trump's judicial appointments.
Right. She claimed there were life in prison sentences, that women having miscarriages were denied care, and that 12 and 13-year-olds in incest cases were being denied care.
And the fact check categorized all of those as true, but with a big caveat.
Right. The caveat is that they refer to specific, often extreme applications of state law. The life in prison sentence, for example, is true, but only in Texas, and it's the maximum possible sentence.
And the miscarriage care.
That's tragically true because the medication and procedures for an inevitable miscarriage can be the exact same as those for an abortion. This medical ambiguity makes doctors fear legal repercussions, so they hesitate or deny care.
Until the patient's life is actually in danger.
Yes. And the incest cases are also true, referencing specific cases like one in Florida where a 13-year-old victim had passed the state's 15-week limit for exemptions. So the claims, while citing specific cases, do show that these new laws are having very real, very negative consequences.
Let's talk about Project 2025. Harris claimed it wants the government to monitor miscarriages.
The analysis rated this mostly false. It fundamentally misrepresents the wording and intent of the document.
So what does the document actually say?
Project 2025 does not call for monitoring miscarriages. What it does advocate for is mandatory data collection on induced abortions.
What's the difference there, and why is it so crucial?
Well, Project 2025 argues that the CDC's current data collection is woefully inadequate. It recommends that HHS require states to report detailed stats on every abortion, the stage of pregnancy, the method, and so on.
So it's about policy and data quality.
Yes, but Harris's claim takes that desire for better data and translates it into this much more intrusive, frightening idea: the government tracking a woman's naturally occurring miscarriage. It's a deliberate exaggeration designed to heighten privacy fears.
Another flashpoint was IVF treatments. Harris claimed they're being denied under new state abortion laws.
And this was rated mostly false and ignores wider facts. This refers specifically to the Alabama Supreme Court ruling that defined frozen embryos as legally protected children.
Okay, but that sounds like it's related to reproductive rights. Why is the claim misleading?
Because the decision was made in the context of a wrongful death civil lawsuit, not an abortion law or a government ban.
Okay.
Couples whose embryos were accidentally lost sued the provider. The court ruling confirmed the legal personhood of the embryo, allowing the lawsuit to proceed.
And so the practical effect was?
IVF providers in the state immediately paused services because they were afraid of huge liability lawsuits if an embryo failed to implant. It was a legal definition of personhood that caused services to pause, not a direct legislative ban.
Okay, finally, let's confirm the claim about J.D. Vance, which was actually brought up by the moderators. Vance stated Trump would veto a federal abortion ban.
And that's verifiably true. Vance explicitly said in interviews that Trump would not support a federal ban, stressing that the policy should be determined by the states. So if a federal ban passed Congress, the only way for Trump to stop it, given his position, would be to veto it.
This review of the average intelligence fact check has already uncovered massive discrepancies between political claims and verifiable context, especially surrounding the economic reality facing average families. But when we return, we are going to escalate this discussion into the most egregious statements of the night claims of political malfeasance, threats to the Constitution, and one truly stunning factual error regarding the U.S. military that was verifiably debunked by the Internal Revenue Service. Don't go anywhere.
Living in rural areas? Or are you always on the road? Experiencing a slow internet connection? Worry no more. Get the Nomad Air modem with a 5G unlimited plan. Our compact modem provides quick, reliable, and secure 5G, 4G LTE connectivity. Connects up to 30 devices at once. Pause or suspend your plans anytime through the Nomad app. Excellent internet connectivity for rural areas residents and on-the-road traveler. For more details, please visit nomadinternet.com and check out our plans.
Welcome back to the AI Analysis Podcast. We are continuing our look at the average intelligence fact check of the 2024 presidential debate, moving now into the realm of political conduct, executive actions, and foreign policy claims.
Right, and the rhetoric here is really all about defining the moral and historical character of your opponent. Harris claimed that Trump was responsible for the worst attack on democracy since January 6th.
Which was rated mostly false and highly dependent on perspective. It's such a subjective measure.
It is. When you use a word like worst, you're inviting a historical comparison. And the fact check wisely brought up September 11th.
Right.
Which, wasn't an attack on the transfer of power, but it was a massive attack on the infrastructure of American governance. It hit the Pentagon. The flight that went down in Pennsylvania was likely targeting the Capitol or the White House.
So while January 6th was this unprecedented domestic assault on the peaceful transition of power, it's a huge rhetorical leap to say it was definitively worse than a coordinated attack that killed thousands and hit the military's nerve center.
It's a massive leap.
Harris also brought up some historical facts from Trump's business life, claiming he was investigated for refusing to rent to black tenants.
And that's true. It's a factual historical event. The Trump Organization was investigated and charged by the Justice Department back in the 1970s.
And what was the result of that?
The case was ultimately settled out of court, with no admission of guilt. So while the resolution was a bit ambiguous, the investigation and the charge itself are documented history.
She also repeated the claim that Trump spread birther lies about Obama.
Also true. Trump actively supported and promoted the belief that Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States. He challenged the authenticity of his birth certificate for years. These are undeniable markers of his past rhetoric.
Okay, let's turn that mirror onto the Biden administration, specifically on accountability. Trump claimed that no one was fired by the administration, especially after the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan.
And this was rated true.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, we saw turnover, right? Resignations, reassignments. But no one in the cabinet or in high-level policy positions was outright terminated or publicly fired for what happened in Afghanistan. Many resignations were framed as retirement or, resigning under pressure.
But the literal claim that no one was fired holds up.
It does, which reflects a perceived lack of internal accountability.
Trump also used an unofficial title to attack Harris, claiming she was appointed as Borders Czar by Biden.
True, but unofficial. The average intelligence analysis confirmed with video evidence that she was repeatedly called that by the media and even by administration spokespeople, especially early on.
Right, when she was tasked with addressing the crisis at the southern border.
But the administration quickly tried to reframe her role, defining it narrowly as focusing only on the root causes of migration, trying to distance her from the operational chaos at the physical border. But the title stuck.
Okay, now for two of the most dangerous claims Harris made about Trump's future intentions. First, that he would weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies.
And this was found to be false, based on the context of his statement. This is a critical distinction between stating intent and defining a conditional action.
So what did he actually say?
He didn't say, "I will weaponize the DOJ." He said he could do this, framing it as a possibility based on the precedent set by the Biden DOJ's investigation and prosecution of him.
So he was basically arguing, you set the precedent, so the genie is out of the bottle, and a future president could use that precedent against you.
Exactly. But it's still a threat, isn't it? I mean, outlining a potential retaliatory action based on precedent still feels like you're weaponizing the department, regardless of the justification.
Yeah, that's a fair point. The fact check is accurate that he didn't state it as a firm intent, but the rhetoric is clearly designed to justify future action by blaming the opponent for setting the stage.
It normalizes what was once unthinkable political behavior.
And the second related claim was that Trump would terminate the Constitution.
This was rated misleading. Again, you have to look at the precise quote. He posted on Truth Social that massive fraud in the 2020 election allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution.
So he was arguing that an unprecedented crisis would justify extreme measures, not that he just intended to discard the founding document on a whim.
Right. It's still constitutionally radical rhetoric to suggest that an election dispute can just override the foundational law of the land. But it's not the blanket statement of intent that Harris presented it as. The distinction hinges entirely on that phrase, massive fraud allows for.
Let's quickly wrap up the foreign policy and military claims. Harris claimed the war in Afghanistan was costing $300 million per day.
True. That number is accurate enough when you average it across the 2 decades of the war. It makes the point about the massive drain on U.S. resources.
And Trump claimed Iran was broke under his administration.
Pretty much true. PolitiFact analysis, cited by the sources, found that his sanctions were highly effective. They caused Iran's foreign exchange reserves to plunge by about 60%.
He also claimed he got the Taliban to stop killing American soldiers for 18 months.
Also true. The deal, which started under his administration, did enforce a verified 18-month period where hostilities against U.S. troops stopped.
Okay, finally, that contentious figure from the Afghanistan withdrawal. Trump claimed the Biden administration left $85 billion in military equipment behind.
A classic case of rhetorical inflation, rated half true.
Half true.
The $83 billion figure that gets thrown around was the total amount allocated for the entire war effort since 2001. That includes troop pay, building bases, training, all of it. Only an estimated $18 billion went toward actually providing equipment to the Afghan army.
So the claim inflates the loss by a factor of 4. It conflates the entire multi-decade war budget with the specific material loss.
It does. It highlights a key strategy. When you're talking budgets, you use the biggest possible number you can find to maximize outrage and political impact. The verifiable loss was substantial, but that $85 billion figure is deliberately misleading.
We've reached the final section, which covers the last big contention points, and that leads us to the claim average intelligence called the doozy, the most egregious factual error of the night.
Let's do it. We revisit January 6th and the ongoing rhetorical battle over Trump's language. Harris claimed Trump incited a violent mob on January 6th.
And the finding was partially true, but false on the main point of incitement. We have to go back to the exact language he used.
We do. Trump's direction to his supporters to march to the Capitol is undeniable. But in that same context, he instructed them to do so peacefully and patriotically.
And legally, that word peacefully really complicates the charge of incitement.
It does. Incitement requires clear advocacy for imminent unlawful action. The political claim focuses on the consequence of the rally, but the legal defense hinges on the instruction he gave. The difference between political interpretation and the legal standard is key here. Okay, next, the persistent claim that Trump brought back the Charlottesville good people on both sides argument.
Debunked and false. This is one of the most durable and misleading edited quotes in modern politics.
So what's the full context?
The analysis provided it. Trump was referring to those protesting the removal of the statues, historical preservationists, not the neo-Nazis or white nationalists whom he explicitly and repeatedly condemned in the very same press conference. Ignoring that full quote lets his opponents perpetually weaponize a fraction of his statement.
And the bloodbath claim. Harris alleged Trump said there would be a bloodbath if he lost the election.
Also taken clearly out of context, rated as misleading. The full audio shows he was talking specifically about the economic future of the American auto industry if he didn't implement certain tariffs. So he used bloodbath as an expression for a severe economic downturn for that one sector.
Exactly. Not a promise or a threat of political violence if he were to lose the election.
All right, now let's talk about the doozy. The most stunning factual error of the debate, identified by the fact-checkers.
This was Kamala Harris's claim that there are no active-duty military personnel in a combat zone anywhere in the world, thanks to the Biden-Harris administration.
And the finding was just false clueless. The objective proof came from a very unexpected source.
It came from the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS.
The IRS.
The IRS maintains a list of designated active combat zones. They do it for the purpose of tax exemptions for military personnel serving in hazardous areas. If the IRS classifies an area as a combat zone, it is an operational fact.
That is incredible. The tax agency provides irrefutable proof of U.S. operational status. So what did the list say?
The IRS designates 17 locations as active combat zones globally. These are areas where U.S. personnel are engaged in counterterrorism or stabilization operations. It includes Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, Somalia, and specific parts of the Persian Gulf and Arabian Sea.
17 locations. And she said 0.
The claim was verifiably dramatically wrong.
To make such an expansive, definitive statement that is so easily disproven by a bureaucratic listing, it just shows a profound disconnect between the administration's stated goals and the operational reality of the military.
It really does. This isn't subjective spin. It's a fundamental error of fact. It speaks volumes about the priority of political narrative over actual operational awareness.
Okay, finally, let's revisit the technical context around financial models and the deficit. We touched on the Wharton School model earlier.
We did. The Wharton School found that Trump's economic plan would increase the deficit by $5.8 trillion over 10 years, while Harris's plan would increase it by $1.2 trillion.
But the crucial context here is the limitation of that model.
Precisely. The Wharton model assumes that government spending stays at current levels. It does not account for any promised spending cuts from either candidate, because those are often, nebulous and hard to verify.
So the deficit prediction is high because the model assumes these huge tax cuts or new spending programs happen on top of current government spending.
Exactly. And there's another complex but vital technical point here. Technically, tax cuts themselves don't grow the deficit. Government spending does. The tax cut only contributes to the deficit when the government has to borrow money to cover the lack of revenue instead of just reducing spending to match it.
So it's about whether you believe tax cuts should be matched by equal spending cuts, or if you're relying on those cuts to generate enough economic growth to pay for themselves later on.
That's the philosophical difference, yes. The Wharton model just shows the short-term impact of revenue loss against static high spending.
Our final point of analysis relates to Social Security, specifically the debate around privatization. The average intelligence fact check provided a pretty shocking number comparing the existing trust fund to a privatized model.
It did. The current value of the Social Security Trust Fund is roughly $2.9 trillion. The analysis compared this to an estimated $8.2 trillion if the money had been privately invested in something like a standard S&P 500 index fund since 2002.
That is an immense opportunity cost. $2.9 trillion versus $8.2 trillion.
It really illuminates why the current system has such lower returns. When you pay into Social Security, the government immediately uses those funds for general spending. In exchange, it issues these special low-interest, special obligation bonds to the trust fund.
So the government is borrowing money from the fund.
Exactly. And because the bonds aren't invested in the market, they can't grow with the economy. And what's worse, when the government pays the interest back on those bonds, it uses future tax money, meaning the taxpayer pays the government back the interest on the money the government borrowed from them in the first place.
Whereas a privatized system would put the funds into investment accounts that grow with the market,
Remaining the citizen's property and potentially yielding that massive difference in retirement savings.
So as we wrap this up, what really stands out is that success in a modern political debate is almost always about rhetorical framing, not just pure factual accuracy.
Absolutely. The main takeaway from looking at this exhaustive fact check is just the enduring need for critical thinking. Both candidates rely so heavily on claims that are factual only if you ignore the crucial contextual details. Always seek the mechanism behind the claim.
On that note, let's revisit the most objectively ridiculous claim we talked about. The one about 0 U.S. soldiers in active combat zones, a claim verifiably debunked by the IRS. When a high-level politician makes a claim that is so fundamentally divorced from verifiable reality confirmed by the U.S. tax agency, no less, how does that level of factual error change how you evaluate their competence to handle high-stakes policy? Being well-informed requires verifying the details in the context of all claims, especially when the facts involve life, death, or the stability of the economy. Be sure to check out more of the Average Intelligence podcast, and thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
We choose to go to the moon and dictate and do the other things.
Weird.
You know, someone said that frickin' Panera's Pepsi's taste funny.
Better.
No, I mean,
What?